2, 1. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's McKaylee. I work with Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. Thank you for being our local community, both virtual and eventually in person. We would not be here as a bookstore without you. The last year, during the global crisis that we've all been experiencing, and even the last 50 years, which is Tattered Cover's 50th anniversary this year in 2021, which is incredible. And we owe it, pretty much all of it, to you. So thank you for being a part of this community. We will never be able to thank you appropriately, but we do so with these amazing events and amazing authors and book recommendations and all sorts of other things that we get to do here as a community institution. So thank you for joining us. Before I go any further, I want to let you know that closed captioning is enabled on this video for those who might want it or need it. There's a black bar at the bottom of the screen with a button labeled CC on it. If you click that button, closed captioning is enabled should you want it or need it. But for those of you who also may not know about Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore located in the Denver area, and we have 4 stores, soon to be 5 this year, and maybe 6, depending on construction. But right now we know for sure we're opening up our all children's location at Stanley Marketplace in Aurora, and that's gonna be happening later this summer. One of our stores is also mid-move right now, so only 3 locations are open. But that said, you can still come in and shop and browse for about 90 minutes or so. Despite the CDC's recommendations at this moment, we are still asking our patrons to wear their masks over their mouth and their nose, as we have a lot of young families, young patrons in there as well. We want to be protective of our staff and our customer base, so we thank you for accommodating that. I want to also let you know that our website is open 24/7. So if you want to stay shopping in your pajamas, if you're not local to Colorado, you can definitely get all of your bookish needs at tatteredcover.com. Also on tatteredcover.com is our events. And holy cow, we have so many, I know, because I'm the one hosting the majority of them, but they're so great. One of my favorites that we have coming up on Wednesday is Cassine Gaines, and he wrote this amazing new book called Footnotes, which is about Black artists and the Great White Way, and the musical Shuffle Along. It's incredible and so great. That's Wednesday, the 26th, at 5 o'clock, and we're partnering with Emancipation Theater, and he's going to be in conversation with Nicole Harris. But tonight, the authors that we have tonight, I'm also very, very excited for. We have Rita Woods in conversation with Samantha Rajaram. These 2 women, I'm very excited for this. I'm so excited to read Samantha's book, The Company Daughters, and Rita's book, Remembrance, is what we are celebrating this evening. So a little bit about our guests. Samantha is a former lawyer, current English professor, solo mom of 3, and the author of the historical fiction novel, The Company Daughters, which was published in October of 2020. She grew up in Gillette, Wyoming, and the California Bay Area, and holds a BA from UCLA and an MA from the University of Pennsylvania, and a law degree from UC Hastings. When she's not following Toni Morrison's advice and writing books she wants to read, she enjoys mentoring other writers in tribute to the generous authors who uplift and inspire her. And then our author of the hour tonight, Rita Woods, is a writer, board certified in internal medicine doctor, and actively practicing as the medical director of a large medical center in Chicago. Her debut novel, Remembrance, received the African American Literary Award for Best Historical Fiction. It was a SIBA Winter Okra pick and one of NPR's best books of 2020, and was included on Pop Sugar's list of books for 2020, among many others. Woods is a trustee on her local library board and has served as an AWP writing mentor. She is currently serving as I needed to make this font bigger, and I apologize to everyone as I'm stumbling through this, but Miss Rita Woods is currently serving as a mentor for the Cinnamon Girl Inc., an organization that fosters the love of writing in high school for girls of color. When not writing or working, Dr. Woods spends time with her family and house full of cats. So it is my honor to welcome both Rita and Samantha to the screen here. I'm going to change over my view and unmute them so we can have both of these wonderful authors join us here. There we go. Perfect. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi.
So I want to
Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Absolutely. Well, I want to let everyone know we're going to be doing a Q&A session after the two authors here have their conversation, there's a chat next to the screen you're watching us on, and so you can type in all of your questions there. For now, Samantha, Rita, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, McKaylee. Hi, Rita.
Hi, Samantha.
It's such a treat to talk to you. It's always been my dream to be able to talk to an author after I finished reading their book. So this is really a treat. I just finished it. As I told you, I was texting you while I was reading it and telling you like, oh, this chapter's so great. I love this part. So this really is such a treat. One of the questions I had was about how you came up with this idea of a multi-POV book. And did you start off thinking about it that way? And did you know how many characters you wanted to be writing about from the get-go, or did you start adding characters in? I'm just really interested in that process.
So starting out, it was really going to be just Winter and Mother Abigail's story. And I think originally I was going to stay sort of mostly in Mother Abigail's point of view, because it was more a sense of there's this woman and she's responsible for this big world and these people and this universe that she's created. And yet she recognizes that she's failing and needs to pass the mantle, so to speak, on to her heir. Fairly quickly, it became clear to me that I wanted to be in Winter's point of view as well, because I wanted to show kind of the dichotomy between what these two women valued. You know, Mother Abigail had gone through this whole kind of devastating arc to get to this place, whereas Winter has sort of always had this sort of protected and isolated and very provincial life. She's never been a slave, had pretty much always grown up in Remembrance. And so I wanted to tell it from both of their point of view. So that was fairly early on. But as time went on, you know, and more issues came up, for instance, where did Mother Abigail get her power, for instance, and who lived in Remembrance, who populated this place, more and more characters kind of came online in terms of needing to tell their story to make Remembrance more three-dimensional.
Maybe, and I know listeners might want a little more context. So could you tell us a little bit about Remembrance, about the book, and maybe about the place as well, if you want?
So Mother Abigail, this story kind of takes place across, 3 centuries, starting just before the Haitian Revolution, just at the cusp of the Haitian Revolution, which took place in 1791. And it is interwoven with a character that is in the 21st century, someone who was impacted by the Haitian earthquake. And it tells the story of Mother Abigail, who was forced to leave Haiti because of the revolution, because of the revolt. She was forced to accompany her mistress, who was fleeing Haiti, and follows kind of her story through Cuba and then New Orleans, and then ultimately to this place in Ohio where she escaped to. And she has the ability to bend time and space, and she creates this alternate universe, or parallel. It's not alternate, it's a parallel universe that exists beside and within Ohio. And it serves as a sanctuary for runaway slaves. And so that's Remembrance. And she calls it Remembrance. And sort of throughout the time period, people find their way there, including a woman, Margot, who escapes from who had been promised her freedom, but because of circumstances that she was betrayed and ends up on a tobacco plantation in Kentucky, and she escapes to there. And then Winter is the heir apparent to Mother Abigail. And then the modern day character is Gael. She is the one who ended up having to leave Haiti after the devastating earthquake, in which she lost all of her family except for her sister, her younger sister.
And how did you come up with the modern character Gael, and why, I guess, did you feel like you wanted to locate it in a contemporary scenario as well as have all these wonderful stories, interwoven stories about the past?
Well, I'm going to be full disclosure. When the book sold, there was no modern day
Oh,
character.
interesting. Okay.
And yeah, so Gael did not exist. And my editor felt very strongly that she wanted a modern day character. And she felt that it would ground the story for more people and sort of set it into a different kind of a universe. And I'm just going to be honest, I fought her tooth and nail on that. Like, I'm not going to do that. And then, as we talked, it felt like, okay, this could be, so I'm going to be honest, it really felt like a marketing decision at the time, that it was just felt like, not that it would necessarily add to the story, but that it would make the story more marketable. But once we sort of started drilling down into it, I actually saw how this could be interwoven into the story to make it, a bigger story. That said, that was the point of view that I struggled with the most initially, because she didn't exist in the story that I had written and that was completed when it was sold. She didn't exist. So we went back and forth about how are we going to make her fit seamlessly into the story that in my mind was already complete. And my editor at the time said, well, maybe she finds a suitcase under the bed and she finds some letters in New Orleans when she's cleaning out. I'm like, isn't that the Notebook? I don't want to do that, So, we had to, kind of figure out a way that wasn't, in my mind, trite, and yet seemed to fit seamlessly as to why there would be a purpose for this woman to actually be in the story. So Gael was a very, very late addition.
Oh, interesting. I thought it worked really seamlessly. Just, I don't know if you want that feedback, but I'm giving it to you. I really liked it. And I really liked the relationship between Gael and Toya also. I thought that was a really important relationship to play up in the book, because we see similar pairings throughout of women helping women through, difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed that part of it. So you didn't really want to write her at first, but as you continued on, did you start to feel better about her as a character?
I did. And in fact, I liked her very, very much. So once I kind of landed on it, the hardest part, Samantha, really was, trying to figure out where she fit in the book. What was her purpose? And what I kind of landed on was that the Josiah character was this universal character thread through all these centuries, and she became the person that would pick up the mantle that Abigail had, and then Winter had, and now in the 21st century, we needed a woman to pick up the mantle of caring for her people. So that theme became stronger for me once I landed on what her purpose was in the book.
Yeah, I could see that. And I also liked how it connects, history to the present too, that the same issues that we saw happening in slavery is, we're still sort of dealing with the impact of all of those reverberations now. I mean, we've certainly seen that really come to us profoundly in the past year.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is, both of us write historical fiction, and it would be nice to think on some level in an ideal world that some of the issues that both of our books, both The Company Daughters and Remembrance, deal with, whether that be, gender issues or the whole issue of, uh, the politicization of women and their place in society, all of that's in the past. But if we look at that, I think that's sort of why historical fiction sometimes reverberates with people or resonates with people, I guess is the word, is because the past is never really the past. I think it just kind of mutates, takes on a different form, sometimes goes undercover and isn't as obvious. Some of the some of the oppression and some of the issues,
Absolutely. I
but they
remember
still,
my agent, when she read my book, was like, oh, this is like a Me Too story of the 17th century, which I thought was, at that time we were going through the Supreme Court justice issues around Justice Kavanaugh, and all of that was really exploding on the scene. And so I thought that was really interesting that she read it that way. But yeah, I definitely see those parallels. Another parallel I saw between both of our books was just there's this sort of thread of aspiration in both of them. It's almost like the two of us are trying to create a different alternative, a different reality for these characters and what they probably would have likely encountered.
yeah, I think that's true. And I think that um, one of the sort of thematic things is being your own self-savior. Is you cannot, there's high level history happening around you, and then there's what happens on a day-to-day basis. And for me, that's always the attraction of historical fiction. I mean, you can talk about the Spanish Inquisition or the Boer War or Civil War or whatever it is period you write in, but I think where it really impacts people is what is the day-to-day like for these characters, because there might be a civil war going on, there might be slavery or whatever it is, um, child slavery, whatever. Yet I still have to find milk, and I still have to find bread, and I still have to get the laundry done. The kids have to be educated. And I think for me, that's kind of the the lure of historical fiction, is that you can tell the big story by telling the small story. Um, in your book, it was, the poverty of this woman, of these women, and how fast your life can change just on a dime. You think your life is one way, and then suddenly it's not, basically with things that are out of your control. You have the Sanjay character whose father dies, and suddenly her world explodes. In mine, there, that sort of parallels the thing with Margot, where I'm a very a slave who's very educated and anticipating my freedom in just a few months, and then due to factors that are completely outside of my control, my master dies and he has all these debts to pay. Suddenly I'm thrust into this whole new world. And yet I there's still the human needs. I want friends, and I have to eat, and there's people that I care about, and how do I navigate all of those very human, very quote small things in the context of these very big things that I have no control over.
Yeah, I would definitely say there's parallels there too, with that precariousness of the lives of our characters. And those were some really heartbreaking parts to read in your book. Just everything turns on a dime and people just don't have control over the outcomes. Particularly for me, scenes where, they were being pursued um, by people who wanted to, bring them back into slavery. That those were hard to read. And I think I told you that in graduate school, I studied slave narrative, and I've read a lot of slave narrative, and it's always so poignant. I'm amazed by how much there's still out there to learn about that period of our history, the reverberations of it, as well as just the individual stories of people's heroism and resilience and strength going through such difficulty.
Right, right.
So Rita, I got to
So
ask
one of
you
the things that I thought was, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna
Go
say,
ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, I just wanted to ask you about the research that you did for this book, because I mean, it's so clear you've done so much work on the research for your book. Can you share a little bit about your research?
That's the part of writing that I love. I love the research, which is probably why I hardly ever get any words on the page because it's like you disappear down this black hole. Um, you're like, I'm just gonna look up, longleaf pine forest in South Carolina. And 2 hours later, I can tell you all about how to make turpentine, which has nothing to do with the book, but I haven't written a single word. So the research part of it is so fun. That said, I also think it kind of leads you, it sometimes gives you things for your book that you weren't anticipating. I don't know if you found that to be true, but like the whole thing in New Orleans, I had never heard of Réveillon before, and it became sort of a theme, a scene in the book. The whole kind of the uprising in New Orleans, I had never heard of that before, and so that became actually a kind of a flex point in the book. One of the things that sent Abigail kind of over the edge was, how that played out. So I think the research is fun just in and of itself, because the world is this really fascinating place, and some of all the things we think we know, there's so many layers underneath that. But also in terms of the writing, very often it can give you these little surprise nuggets that you can kind of, oh, this is a great way to make X happen.
Mm-hmm. I totally relate to all of that, going down rabbit holes and emerging 5 hours later going, I know a lot about glass blowing, but for my book.
Right. Has nothing to do with anything, but if
Right.
if it comes up at a party, I got it.
I think in my book, one of the things I found most interesting to research about was the use of slavery by the Dutch in Java, Indonesia. And it was that they not only brought slaves from South Africa, which was the point that they stopped at before they got to Java, but also that they brought slaves from other countries, like from India, for example. So, throughout the process of writing my book, I kept coming up against the sense of like, why am I the person to tell this story of these two Dutch women who fall in love en route to Java? And then I would have these moments where when I discovered that, oh, they brought Indian people to work as slaves too, to do all the terraforming to try to make this, Jakarta look like Amsterdam, essentially. When I learned that, I was like, okay, maybe this is exactly the book that I'm supposed to write.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting to learn about that. And I also found out that some of the people that they brought were from South India, which is the part of India that my family's from. So that made me feel even more entitled to tell the story.
Yeah, I think we're in this kind of very strange, period where, that question keeps coming up: who's entitled to tell what story?
Mm-hmm.
And I I think that's sort of some murky water and some very, kind of fraught territory to get into. I think, again, as writers, I think stories come to you. I don't know that we come to stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we're just drawn to certain things and they speak to us. I think the big thing for that is to be as honest about why you want to tell that story and why it speaks to you and why you think you're the best person to tell that story. I think that's the only way that you can navigate that. And again, as a writer, just do the best you can. I mean, otherwise we are put into these narrow boxes that, you would only write stories about Indian women. I would only write stories about Black women. And, neither one of our world is confined to that demographic, and our experiences are bigger than that, I think.
Yes, I've definitely encountered that, and I come up against it as a writer, myself. So I appreciate you saying that. I agree that the stories sort of come to us, whether we want them to or not, but for me,
Exactly.
So of the characters that you wrote about in this book, I am really curious to see which one did you like the most?
So it varies from time to time. I don't know how to say this sentence, and and for my next book, I'm going to have to be very cautious about characters. One of my favorite characters, because whenever I say the sentence, it's got a double entendre. I love Dix.
Okay.
He see, but but I love him because I like his story arc. I like the fact that he is able to change, and you see him become a different person and become a valuable person to for Remembrance. Um, I also I I mean I like all of them. I really like Gael because she's just so kind of lost. Um, I don't know that I like Mother Abigail. You
Mm.
know, I like her as a character, but in terms of identifying with her, she's so damaged and so angry, and her power is driven from that anger.
Yeah.
Even after she gets to Remembrance, she remains angry. Whereas some of the other characters, like um, David Henry and even Margot, kind of have a transformation where they are broken and yet feel like, to me, feel like they get put back together. I think Abigail remains broken throughout the whole thing, and she's just fueled by rage, which isn't a bad thing, but I don't, it makes me sad for her because she remains fueled by rage throughout the whole book.
Yeah, I could see that. I also really liked the Dick's character a lot. And I think it sort of played into that aspirational sense I was getting. Like, could there be a situation like this where, someone like him was more accepted in their community after everything that they had been through? And I appreciated him a lot for that reason.
And I also thought there was some irony in it, in that, here's this white boy um, who ends up who's the biggest thing he wanted was to survive, number one, and number two, find a place to belong. And the place, ironically, that he ends up belonging more than anywhere else is in this Black community.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that is a wonderful way of looking at it too. And sometimes that is actually what happens in reality as well. I mean, I think of my own experiences and some of the odd communities that I've found myself in that are more embracing than the ones that I would imagine would be the right communities for me. So that rang very true to me. But he is sort of a lovable, if sort of hapless character at times.
He is. He's just kind of, I just want to survive. He just wants to survive.
Yeah,
So I think that as soon as he found someone that could accept him and kind of love him, that's like, okay, these are my people. We don't look alike, but they're my people.
right, right.
And I think that's kind of true life too, right? That, you know, you might look like me, but that's the only thing we have in common. Whereas these people look different than me, and yet everything else about it feels right.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely could feel that from that character for sure. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing practice? I know we're both, busy full-time working moms, so I'm curious to know a little bit about your writing practice.
Yeah, it's generous to call it a practice, but so what I try to do is get up every morning between 5 and 5:30 in the morning, because that gives me at least an hour and a half to 2 hours to before everyone gets up. And it's especially, and I know you know this, especially this year where everyone's signing on to to the internet, virtual school, nobody knows any where they're supposed to be. So that at least gives me a couple of hours to kind of um get my act together. And the other thing that I found that actually saves my life really is, like, every 2 to 3 months, I'll try to check into a hotel again, pre-COVID, try to check into a hotel and just, have from Friday night till Monday morning to just no distractions, not thinking, well, I'm sitting here, I should throw a load of laundry in, or I don't know why the cat is eating grass and throwing it up on the carpet. It's just, I have that kind of very focused time, and that seems to work for me. It's the most productive. Is boom, I have this 2 or 3 days of just, there's nothing but me and Cheetos or whatever I can get out of the vending machine.
And this is your debut, right, Rita?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I'm just wondering this is also, The Company Daughters is also my debut, and I'm just wondering, like, what has been the most surprising thing that you've experienced as a debut writer?
Almost everything. Um, did you have those killer essays you had to do like when the book came out? It's like I don't write essays, and I was writing essays like every week, thinking, I don't know how to do to stop. Don't make me write any more essays. And especially when they'd be loosey goosey and say stuff like, well, can you write an essay about, how your book factors into Afrofuturism?
Oh, wow.
No, no, I cannot. I don't know what that word means. you know so that was surprising, and just the whole idea of, you and I are both smart women, and I think I know a little bit about everything, but I clearly don't know anything about publishing, so it's a whole different kind of a beast, and about how much you need to know, just that I didn't know. The upside part of the process has been it coming from an extremely competitive field. I can't get over how generous kind of the book publishing author community is. Everyone's just so kind and giving and willing to kind of, sure, you want to come on here and let me boost you and amplify your voice. And the first 6 months, Samantha, I really was, what is your angle? What's the deal here? Why are you being nice to me?
Is that a
Because
medical
I'm
school
just
thing?
not used, Yeah, yes. Yes, it is. It's
Just
like,
a guess.
no, medical school, if you're nice, you're messing up the curve, man. I'm not going to be nice to you. Um, so, so that has been really just so surprising, so shocking. And I love it. I love how kind and generous and warm the writing community and the reading community is.
Yes, absolutely. And I would include you in my own assessment of that, because you reached out to me and I was fangirling from the beginning of reading your book. And it was just so nice to be able to talk to you about it. And of course, to have this opportunity as well. And we have some friends in common. So it is a small world. And it's just, lovely to help each other out. And like you, I went to law school, so similar situation of sort of sometimes feeling like you're in a, sort of surrounded by folks who don't really want you to do well necessarily. So it is such a nice surprise. I always wonder, is that a historical fiction writer thing, or is that across genres? Like, I don't really know at this point.
It seems to be cross genre. I've had romance writers um, be very kind. I've had, and I went to a conference, and this woman she walked up to me, she was talking and chatting, and she was so nice, and just, she was really nice. And it wasn't until she walked away, I said, oh, is this your first book? And she's like, no, it's like my fifth. And it wasn't until she walked away that I realized it was Julie Murphy, who had written Dumpling and, all these books that have gone to movies. And
Wow.
and I actually love her books. It's like, oh, she just said her name was Julie. I didn't know who she was. And, but she was like, oh, here's my number. And I'm like, I'm not calling Julie Murphy. So it doesn't seem to be just historical. It seems to be kind of across. Charlene Harris did the same thing. I met her at the vampire, True Blood writer,
Oh,
and
wow.
I just love her. And all she did was talk about, this meeting that she'd been at, with a party that she'd been at with Jeffrey Epstein, and she was angry that he kept thinking she wrote the sparkly vampire books. It's like,
Oh.
my vampires don't sparkle.
That's great. Great.
I'm so enjoying the two of you talking. It's so hard to cut in and stop with audience Q&A. Also, Julie Murphy and Charlene Harris, we've been honored to have at the store, and they're both wonderful. So you are in good company. And
Yeah.
as somebody who has met a lot of authors and stuff, that camaraderie is really special. And I'm so glad that both of you as debuts have been able to experience that. It's a huge deal. And so I'm really glad that you both are experiencing that. So I just had to say that before we move to audience Q&A. So we're opening it up to questions. You have a chat next to the screen you're watching us on right now, and you can write any questions that you ask for both Rita and Samantha, which I think this first one is a really good one. What writing advice do you have that you want to give specifically to young BIPOC writers?
So, I think everyone always says the same thing, just write, write, write. But I do think that you need to know your community. I would say this last year particularly has, I think, seen a mini explosion of some really varied voices that normally wouldn't have gotten brought to the forefront. And I think, I don't know what this person writes, but you need to read, I would suggest reading outside your preferred genre. Not just the genre that you write in. So whether that's, if you write romance, that's wonderful. And luckily there are some BIPOC romance that's pretty hot right now. So I would certainly read in genre, but I would also read outside of genre, whether that's nonfiction or historical or literary, women's fiction, whatever it is that you write. I think you need to, it's important to get an idea of voice and the variations, and not just be trapped in the idea that if you're a BIPOC writer, you're writing urban or whatever it is that people automatically assume. So
I think that's great advice. Samantha, what do you have to add to that?
I'm a community college professor, and a lot of my students are BIPOC students. I'm a person of color, but I'm not Black or Indigenous. But what I always tell them is that they belong in this world of writing, and that their voice is needed. And you don't hear that enough. And I certainly didn't hear that at all growing up in Wyoming. And I didn't know what to write as a kid growing up in Wyoming. Like, could I really write about the Indian experience when I was the only Indian person in my community, really? I mean, other than my parents and my sister. So, I remind them that their voice is valuable, and that they, shouldn't forget that, and never feel like their voice should be diminished or hidden, because we actually need more of that. And as a professor, those are the writers that I teach exclusively.
That's amazing. And I want to take both of those sound bites, because I think that lots of people need to hear that. So thank you for sharing it as well. I think another great question about writing: why books? What appeals to you about books as a format rather than, say, screenwriting or poetry? What is it about them? Rita, do you want to kick us off again?
oh God, screenwriting to me is so hard. I've taken a couple screenwriting classes, and it always feels like my eyeballs are going to explode out of my head. It's a whole different. It's like writing for a novelist. That's no different than saying, why don't you write music, right? Because it's a completely different animal. When I would take the screenwriting classes, you have things that are called beats, so many beats. And then screenwriting, the page has to be fairly white, meaning that, you're giving cues, and here's the thing. And somehow you have to be able to convey all of the inner life and all of the inner universe that a novelist can write, has to somehow come out on the page in like 6 sentences. And that's just some kind of hellish torture for me. So I can't do that. And poetry, I can write poetry. It's horrible. It's horrific. I sound like Dr. Seuss on meth or something. I can't, it's just not, my brain doesn't work that way. I'm either doing that kind of sing-song stuff that it's like somebody not, just hit her in the head, or I'm doing that, heart-wrenching, junior high goth stuff. It's just not it is not how my brain's wired.
That's perfectly okay. Samantha, what about for you? Your brain is more wired towards novels, and what is appealing about that to you?
I think it's, novels and books were what saved me. as a kid growing up in Wyoming. I was a very lonely kid. My parents were immigrants from India, and they were so busy navigating this new country. And they were the only pediatricians in the county where I grew up in Wyoming. And so they were very busy. And I was alone a lot and didn't have anyone to talk to about the experiences that I had growing up in that environment. And so I turned to books. And I remember, when I started reading James Baldwin, he was the author of who I first really connected with and felt like, oh my gosh, like he is speaking to something that I understand on a very real level. And, so for me to feel like I'm paying back those authors who sustained me and helped me in so many ways, like there really isn't any other art form that I would want to do or would have any knowledge about how to do.
That's amazing. Thank you for that story too, because I'm sure that unfortunately still in our world there are kids that need books in that same way. So thank you for sharing that. This is going to be unfortunately our last question here tonight, but it's one we really like to ask, and we'd love to ask Samantha for you as the reader and for Miss Rita you as the writer. But what did Remembrance teach you? And I'd love it if we could start with Samantha and then end with Rita Woods, our author of the hour here. But what did Remembrance teach you?
Wow. I mean, that's a lot. It taught me a lot. I mean, so, there was me as the reader who's just enjoying a really beautiful story coming together. I love the magical realism in this story. Octavia Butler is one of my favorite writers, and there were aspects of this that kind of made me think about her. And I loved Kindred, and I've taught it before. So there was that element as a reader that really pulled me in. As a writer, I was constantly just amazed with the structure of the novel and how Rita, the way she shifts in characters. It's not it's it's like different than what I expected. It's not like you're going alternately back and forth and back and forth. There's a different rhythm to it, which I really enjoyed. And then the language in the book is also really beautiful, and some of the descriptions were so evocative. So it's hard for me to answer that question because I have to kind of bifurcate myself into like, oh, there's the author, me, who's reading this, trying to learn, and then there's the me who's a reader who is just learning about this period of history and through reading this book. So, and there's so much more there, but I think that's a good summary.
I think that's a very human way to approach it too, for you coming at it as a writer and as a reader, and what we all get to learn from it, because I assume that you're not going to be the only one who's thinking from those two sides of the coin there too. Rita, what did Remembrance teach you?
What did it teach me? You know, I don't. It taught me to never write in a language that I don't speak. Number one, that was my. Don't do that. I will never do that again. That's a lie. I did it again. I'm a slow learner. But I think the biggest thing was struggling to, or not struggling, but being very aware of trying to make characters that feel both human, that you can identify with, that are flawed and yet three-dimensional, and someone that you still felt an attachment to. So that was the writing process of it. In terms of, but there was also a lot of stuff that I learned as I researched it, and that has continued to resonate with me ongoing. It has informed my I think of myself as a political animal anyway, and I think it has informed my politics a little bit, just in terms of something that Samantha and I talked about a little bit earlier, the continued thread and the continued vibration and resonance of history, even up until the present time, even more than I knew, because that wasn't really my intent when I started out, writing the book, but it is certainly something that continues to play a part in my current everyday thought process. And it'll probably inform any novel that I write going forward as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for your candor. Thank you for your kindness. This has been such a wonderful treat to be on the fly on the wall of your conversations, and then wonderful questions from our viewers as well. you need to get your copy of Remembrance. You can get it at tatteredcover.com or at any one of our locations by Rita Woods, excuse me. I want to give each of you a chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and anything else that you want to say before we close out this evening. And Samantha, I'm going to have you start again, and we'll end with Rita Woods.
Oh, sure. So my website is www.samantharajaram.com, and my book is, I'll show you it. It's right here. It's The Company Daughters, and it's finalist for the Goldie Award and the Bisexual Book Award. So I'm really excited about that. And it's a queer historical fiction novel.
And my name is Rita Woods, and that's Samantha's book.
Thank you.
Such a fan. And this is Remembrance, and my website is ritawoodswrites.com, and I'm on Twitter at RitaWoods723. I'm on Instagram at RitaWoods723. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. So.
And I'm McKaylee with Tattered Cover Bookstore. You can follow us on social media or see our website at tatteredcover.com for all of our future events coming up. I'll ask you two to just stick around while I finish out closing our event here. We have been talking to Rita Woods about her book Remembrance, and we've been in conversation with Samantha Rajaram as well. We thank you all so much for joining us. For some of you out there right now, it's dinner time, and so maybe think about supporting a local mom and pop restaurant or another local community business. We would not be here without you, and we thank you for your continued support this year and the previous years and all the ones to come. So thank you again, and you can get your copies of Remembrance today at tatteredcover.com. Stay safe, everybody. Happy reading. Good night, all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
And we're out.